New York, April. Amid the urban chaos of one of the busiest cities in the world, a family drama of sacrifice and despair was about to unfold, capturing the attention of millions and revealing the depth of human dedication. Abigail Johnson, a 34-year-old woman with a history of psychiatric problems, lived a life of constant struggle. From a young age, she faced a silent battle against depression, dark thoughts, and auditory hallucinations. Despite the difficulties, Abigail was always known for her determination and unwavering love for her family, especially for her uncle Paul Smith. Paul Smith had always been a man of simple habits. As a former New York City bus driver, he knew the city like the back of his hand. Every corner, every street, every familiar face of the passengers he transported daily. But years of hard work and a life of excess had taken their toll. At 68, Paul was a shadow of the vigorous man he once was. A recent bout of pneumonia nearly took his life, and he had spent the last few days in the hospital, weakened and dependent on medical care. Abigail Johnson, his 34-year-old niece, was his only close family. Abigail had her own demons to face. Diagnosed with severe depression and psychiatric disorders, she fought daily to maintain her sanity. However, when Paul was discharged from the hospital, there was no doubt in her mind that she would take care of him. It was the least she could do for the man who had always been there for her despite his own problems. "How are you feeling today, Uncle Paul?" asked Abigail as she adjusted the pillows in the garage-turned bedroom. "Better, Abby, better," replied Paul, forcing a smile. "I still feel weak, but I'm happy to be home." The garage, improvised as Paul's new bedroom, was far from ideal. An old mattress, warm blankets, and some second-hand furniture made up the environment. The stairs in the house were an insurmountable obstacle for Paul, and the garage was the only place where he could move around minimally. "Do you remember that trip we planned to take when I retired?" Paul asked, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Of course I remember, Uncle," Abigail replied with a smile. "We were going to Florida to visit those beaches you always talked about. And maybe even visit Disneyland just to see if I'm still young enough to ride the roller coaster." He laughed, but a cough soon interrupted the moment. "You're still young at heart," Abigail said, trying to lighten the seriousness of the situation. The following days were a mix of challenges and small moments of joy. Abigail cared for Paul with a dedication that few people could understand. Each morning began with the routine of medications, followed by a light breakfast that she prepared with great care. "Abby, you don't have to do everything by yourself," Paul said one day, watching his niece run around the house. "You already have your own problems to deal with." "I know, Uncle, but you were always there for me. Now it's my turn to be here for you," she replied, not stopping to rest. Medical bills began to pile up quickly. Abigail, already struggling to survive with her part-time job, saw her savings disappear. Sleepless nights became a constant as she tried to figure out how to pay for all of Paul's medications and treatments. "I received a letter from the bank," Paul announced one day, holding a crumpled envelope. "They approved a loan, $17,000. Abigail looked at him surprised. "That's great, Uncle Paul. With that money, we can cover all your medical expenses." Paul smiled, but his expression was tired. "Yes, dear. We just need to go to the bank and finalize everything." In the following days, Abigail started making plans on how to use the money to ensure the best care for Paul. She researched private nurses and medical equipment that could make his life easier. Every decision was made with the care and love she always felt for her uncle. Despite all the difficulties, there were moments of tenderness and connection between the two. On spring afternoons, Abigail would push Paul's wheelchair to the garden, where he could feel the warmth of the sun on his face. "You know, Abby," Paul said one day, looking at the blooming flowers, "you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know what I would do without you." Abigail squeezed Paul's hand, feeling a wave of emotion. "And I don't know what I would do without you, Uncle." However, Even with these moments of closeness, Paul's health continued to decline. Abigail was always by his side, ensuring he was comfortable and cared for. But deep down, they both knew time was running out. "We need to go to the bank next week," Paul reminded, his voice weak but determined. "Let's get this over with once and for all." "Sure, Uncle. We'll do that," Abigail replied, with a firmness she didn't feel. She knew the situation was grave, but she refused to let despair take over. Each day was a battle, but also a chance to show how much she loved her uncle. Thus, the week passed quickly, with each day bringing new challenges. Abigail continued to care for Paul with all the love and dedication, determined to do everything she could to improve his life. The trip to the bank was approaching, and with it, the hope that they would finally have some financial relief. The day of the bank visit finally arrived. Abigail woke up early. The sun was just rising over New York, and the air was cold and crisp. Paul had had a rough night, and Abigail had to administer his medication several times to help him sleep. Despite the exhaustion, she was determined to make this day successful. "Uncle Paul, today is the day," she said, with a hopeful smile as she helped Paul sit in the wheelchair. "We're going to the bank to settle this and make sure you have everything you need." Paul smiled weakly. "Yes, Abby, I'm ready. Let's do this." The journey to the bank was smooth. Abigail called a rideshare driver, and the driver, a friendly man named Jack, helped place Paul in the wheelchair in the back seat of the car. "Let's go, sir, slowly and carefully," Jack said as he assisted. "Thank you, young man," Paul responded with a nod. The ride to Brooklyn Center was marked by tense silence. Abigail looked out the window, lost in thoughts and worries, while Paul rested with his eyes closed. When they arrived at the mall, Abigail thanked the driver, and with the help of an acquaintance of Paul who was waiting for them, they managed to get Paul back into the wheelchair. "Thank you, Mike," she said to the friend. "I couldn't have done this alone." "No problem, Abby. I'm here to help," Mike replied, holding the door of the mall as they entered. The atmosphere inside the Bank of America was cold and corporate, starkly contrasting with Abigail's emotional intensity. The bank staff seemed busy, but one of them, a young woman named Rachel, immediately noticed Paul's fragile state. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" Rachel asked, forcing a professional smile. "We're here to finalize a loan that was approved for my uncle," Abigail said, trying to stay calm. "He is Paul Smith." Rachel checked the documents and nodded. "Of course. Please follow me to the service office." Abigail pushed Paul's wheelchair to the office, where Rachel began preparing the necessary documents. "Mr. Smith, we need you to sign here," Rachel said, placing the papers in front of Paul. Paul tried to move, but seemed weaker than ever. "Abby, I need help," he murmured. "Of course, Uncle. I'm here," Abigail replied, holding Paul's hand and helping him grasp the pen. As he attempted to sign, Rachel noticed something strange. Paul was motionless, his hand cold to the touch. "One moment, ma'am," Rachel said, standing up and quickly leaving the room. Abigail felt a wave of panic. "Uncle Paul, please stay with me," she whispered. Rachel returned with 2 security guards and another staff member. "Ma'am, we need to call an ambulance," Rachel said, her voice tense. "Your uncle is unresponsive." Abigail began to cry, desperation taking over. "No, he was fine. He was fine this morning," she repeated, as if trying to convince herself. The following minutes were a blur. The paramedics arrived quickly and confirmed Rachel's fear. Paul was dead and had been for some time. "He must have passed away at least an hour ago," one of the paramedics said, looking at Abigail with compassion. Abigail felt the world collapse around her. Everything she had fought for, all her hopes of ensuring a better future for Paul, crumbled. The police were called, and Abigail was detained on the spot. Shock and confusion dominated the scene, with bank customers and staff watching, bewildered. As she was placed in the police car, Abigail looked back at Paul's body being taken away by the paramedics. "I just wanted to help," she whispered, her voice broken by despair and pain. The truth behind Abigail's actions was yet to be revealed, and as the car drove away, she knew she would face tough times ahead. What seemed to be a simple attempt to get financial help had turned into a series of tragic events that would change their lives forever. The investigation was just beginning, and Abigail's true motivation and sacrifice would soon come to light, painting a much more complex and profound picture than anyone could have imagined. The cell was cold and damp, the silence broken only by the distant sound of New York traffic. Abigail sat on a hard bench, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of despair and guilt. The hours dragged by, each minute heightening the sense of unreality. How could everything have gone so wrong? "Abigail Johnson?" The police officer's voice made her lift her head. "It's time for your interrogation." She stood up slowly, her legs trembling. She was led down a long corridor to an interrogation room. The room was small and dimly lit, with a metal table and 2 chairs. Sitting in one of the chairs was Detective Marcus Hayes, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a serious demeanor. "Please have a seat," Hayes said, pointing to the chair opposite him. Abigail obeyed, feeling small and vulnerable under the detective's scrutinizing gaze. I just wanted to help my uncle," she began, her voice trembling. "Let's start from the beginning, Abigail," Hayes said calmly, opening a notebook. "Tell me everything, from the moment your uncle was discharged from the hospital." Abigail took a deep breath and started to tell her story, from Paul's release from the hospital to the fateful day at the bank. He was so weak, but he still had hope. We needed that money to pay the medical expenses. I didn't know that he had died while we were at the bank. I just wanted to help him. Hayes listened attentively, noting down every detail. "Did you realize he was dead before you got to the bank?" he asked, lifting his eyes from the notebook. "No," Abigail replied, shaking her head. "He just seemed to be sleeping. He was so tired. I thought he just needed to rest." As Abigail spoke, Hayes asked detailed questions about her interactions with Paul, her caregiving, and the decision to take his body to the bank. "You mentioned you were desperate for the money. Can you explain more about that?" "Yes," Abigail replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was using all my savings to care for him. The costs were exorbitant and I couldn't afford everything. When he got the loan, it seemed like our only hope." Hayes paused, studying Abigail for a moment. "We found documents at your home, medical payment records, and expense notes. It's clear you were doing everything you could to care for your uncle." Abigail nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I would do anything for him. He was always there for me. It was my turn to repay him." The detective closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair. "Abigail, I believe you were trying to do what you thought was right. But taking a body to the bank is an extreme measure. Do you understand the gravity of that?" "I know," Abigail whispered, the tears finally falling. "I know it sounds insane, but I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." Hayes remained silent for a moment, allowing Abigail to compose herself. "We need to continue the investigation, which means you'll need to stay in custody for now. But we'll review all the evidence and talk to the people who knew you and your uncle." Abigail nodded again, resigned to her fate. As she was led back to her cell, she felt a mix of relief and fear. Relief at having told her story, but fear of what was to come. Meanwhile, Detective Hayes and his team began to delve deeper into the investigation. They visited Abigail's home, talked to neighbors and friends, and gathered more evidence about the relationship between Abigail and Paul. Each new piece of information added layers to the complex story. At Abigail's home, they found an improvised room in the garage, clearly adapted to accommodate Paul. There were medication bottles, notes of medical visits, and a worn-out wheelchair, all indicating the level of care Abigail dedicated to her uncle. "She was really doing the best she could," commented Officer Jennifer Blake, examining the documents. This is more complicated than it seems. Yes, agreed Hayes. We need to talk to more people, understand the family dynamics and Abigail's mental state. Something here doesn't quite fit. As the investigation continued, more witnesses were interviewed. Mike, the acquaintance of Paul who helped on the fateful day, provided more information about Paul's fragile state and Abigail's tireless dedication. She never complained, said Mike. She always did everything with a smile, despite the difficulties. In the following days, the investigation team worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle. The emerging picture was one of a desperate woman, battling her own mental limitations to care for the man who meant everything to her. There were still many unanswered questions, and the full truth was far from revealed. But one thing was certain. The story of Abigail and Paul was much more than a simple attempt at fraud. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and despair that needed to be understood in all its depth. Days turned into weeks as Abigail remained in custody, and the investigation continued. Detective Marcus Hayes and his team were determined to uncover the full truth behind Abigail's desperate actions. The emerging picture was complex, woven with threads of sacrifice, love, and silent suffering. In Detective Hayes's office, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Jennifer Blake, responsible for reviewing the medical documents, sat at the table surrounded by piles of papers. "Detective, I found something interesting," she said, handing a report to Hayes. Hayes took the document and read it carefully. "These are medical payment records that Abigail made with her own money," he commented, raising an eyebrow. She was clearly investing everything she had in Paul's care. "That's not all," Blake continued. "I interviewed some neighbors and friends. They all say the same thing. Abigail was tireless. She spent sleepless nights ensuring Paul had everything he needed. She even rejected help from social services because she believed she could take better care of him herself." "Interesting," murmured Hayes, making notes. "Let's keep going. I want to talk to Abigail's psychiatrist." A few days later, Hayes and Blake met with Dr. Robert Matthews, Abigail's psychiatrist. He welcomed them into his office, a cozy space decorated with plants and books. "Thank you for seeing us, Dr. Matthews," said Hayes, shaking the doctor's hand. "We're trying to understand Abigail's mental state and the context of her actions." "The pleasure is mine," Dr. Matthews replied, indicating they should sit. Abigail is a complicated patient, but also extremely dedicated. She suffers from severe depression and auditory hallucinations, but never let that interfere with her care for her uncle. If I had to describe her in one word, it would be altruistic. Blake took notes. She mentioned feeling desperate, especially about finances. Could that have influenced her actions? "Without a doubt," Dr. Matthews replied. Her financial situation was dire. Abigail often spoke about the pressure of caring for Paul alone. She believed that the loan approval was a miraculous solution to their problems. This, combined with her mental condition, likely led her to make desperate decisions. "Did she ever talk about what she would do if she couldn't get the money?" Hayes asked. "The fear of losing the ability to care for Paul was constant," Dr. Matthews said, shaking his head. She was willing to do anything to ensure he was well. In Abigail's mind, there were no limits to what she would do for him. Hayes and Blake left Dr. Matthews' office with a deeper understanding of the situation. Abigail was not just a desperate woman, she was a dedicated caregiver, fighting against her limitations to save her uncle. Back at the police department, Hayes called a meeting with his team. "We need to gather more evidence showing Abigail's true motivation. If we can prove she was acting out of desperation, it could change everything." The team began re-examining the evidence and interviewing more people who knew Abigail and Paul. One name that repeatedly came up was Lisa Hernandez, a close friend of Abigail who frequently helped her at home. Hayes decided to visit her. Lisa welcomed them warmly. "Abby is like a sister to me," she said, serving coffee. "I knew how much she was struggling, but I never imagined things would come to this." "Can you tell us more about their daily life?" Hayes asked. "Abigail was tireless," Lisa replied. "She worked part-time, but always found time to care for Paul. She did everything: cleaning, cooking, administering medications. I often told her to accept professional help, but she refused. She said it was her responsibility." "Did she mention anything about the loan?" Blake asked. "Yes," Lisa responded. "When she found out it was approved, she was so relieved. It was like a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She was counting the days to the bank visit, hopeful that she could finally give Paul the help he needed." After the visit to Lisa, Hayes felt they were getting closer to the truth. Abigail was not a common criminal. She was a woman who had sacrificed everything for her uncle. He knew the next step would be crucial to resolving the case. While Abigail remained in custody, her future uncertain, Hayes prepared the final report for the prosecutor. He included all the evidence, testimonies, and expert opinions that painted a picture of a woman driven by love and desperation, not malice. The story of Abigail and Paul was not just about a loan or a tragic day at the bank. It was a story of sacrifice, of a woman who gave everything to care for her beloved uncle. As Hayes compiled the report, he hoped that this understanding would bring some measure of justice and compassion to Abigail's plight. Detective Marcus Hayes's detailed report on Abigail Johnson reached the city prosecutor's hands. The collected information painted a complex and multifaceted picture of a woman whose unwavering dedication to her uncle was driven by a mix of deep love and growing desperation. However, the prosecutor still needed more evidence to build a solid case. It was time to delve even deeper into Abigail's life. Hayes and Blake decided to visit the place where Paul worked before his retirement. At the old bus garage, they found several colleagues who remembered Paul well. One of them, John Thompson, was a close friend of Paul's and had a special bond with Abigail. "Paul talked a lot about Abigail," said John, as he fiddled with an old coffee mug. "He said she was the reason he kept fighting." "Do you know if they had any conflicts in the past few months?" Blake asked. "Conflicts? No, not at all," John replied. "But he was very worried about finances. Paul didn't want to be a burden on Abigail. He even talked about doing something drastic to relieve her pressure." "Like what?" Hayes asked, his interest piqued. John hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Paul mentioned once that he thought about not telling Abigail about the loan so she wouldn't worry. He wanted to use the money to ensure she was okay even after he was gone." Meanwhile, Blake was reviewing Paul's medical diaries and found something intriguing. A note from Paul's doctor suggesting that he was in worse condition than Abigail knew. Paul was hiding the true extent of his illness to protect Abigail from emotional suffering. Hayes found Abigail in her cell, looking fragile and exhausted. "We need to talk, Abigail," he said gently, sitting down in front of her. "There's something you haven't told me about Paul." Abigail looked at him, her eyes red from many sleepless nights. "I've told you everything. What more is there to say?" "Paul was sicker than you knew," Hayes said. "He was trying to protect you. We found evidence that he wanted to ease your burden. He knew he didn't have much time and wanted to ensure you would be okay." Hayes's words seemed to pierce Abigail's heart. She began to cry silently, the truth revealed in a way she could no longer hide. "I knew he was suffering, but he never told me how much. I just wanted to help him," she whispered. In the following days, Hayes and Blake continued to gather information. An unexpected witness emerged: the nurse who cared for Paul during his hospital visits. Susan Miller was a veteran nurse who remembered Abigail and Paul well. "Abigail was here every day," Susan said while reviewing medical records. "She asked questions, wanted to know every detail about Paul's treatment. I've never seen someone so dedicated." "And what about Paul?" Hayes asked. "Did you notice anything unusual about him?" Susan sighed, her expression serious. "Paul was hiding a lot of pain. He always smiled when Abigail was around, but when she left, he would break down. Once he told me he didn't want to live if it meant being a burden to her. Blake took quick notes. Do you think he was aware that he was dying? Yes, Susan replied. He knew, and I believe he was trying to find a way to ensure Abigail had a future, even if he wasn't around. With these new insights, Hayes knew he needed to prepare a final report that reflected the true nature of Abigail's sacrifice. He gathered his team to discuss the next steps. We need to make sure the prosecutor understands that Abigail is not a common criminal, Hayes said. She was battling deep desperation, trying to save her uncle while protecting herself from the harsh reality. I agree, Blake said. I believe the new evidence will show the jury that she deserves compassion, not condemnation. Hayes finalized the report, including all the findings, the medical diaries, testimonies from friends and family, and the nurse's statement. He knew the legal battle was just beginning, but he was determined to reveal the complete truth about Abigail. As Abigail's case approached trial, the community began to rally in support of her. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who heard her story started to see Abigail not as a criminal, but as a tragic figure, caught in a web of sacrifice and despair. The trial would be the ultimate test, but Hayes and his team had uncovered a narrative of love, sacrifice, and resilience that could not be ignored. Abigail Johnson's story was not just about a loan or a tragic day at the bank. It was about the lengths a person would go to care for a loved one and the profound impact of hidden struggles. The prosecutor's office was filled with documents and reports, an atmosphere of intense preparation hanging in the air. Prosecutor James Carter was a serious man, known for his relentless pursuit of justice. As he reviewed Detective Marcus Hayes's detailed report, he frowned, reflecting on the complexities of Abigail Johnson's case. Carter, you need to see this, said his assistant, Karen Mills, entering the room with more documents. These are the testimonies of Abigail's neighbors and friends. They paint a very different picture of her than we initially thought. Carter took the papers and began to read. Each testimony, each sentence revealed Abigail's dedication and sacrifice in caring for her Uncle Paul. He could not ignore the depth of the situation. Abigail was not a common criminal. She was a desperate woman, fighting against all odds to save someone she deeply loved. This changes things, Carter murmured. We need to reassess our approach. A strategic meeting was called in the prosecutor's office. Present were Carter, Karen, Detective Hayes, and some attorneys from the prosecution. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited Carter's decision on the direction of the case. We have enough evidence to proceed with charges of attempted fraud and desecration of a corpse, Carter began, looking at everyone. But we also have a significant amount of evidence showing that Abigail was acting under extreme desperation and a complex emotional situation. We need to consider the possibility of seeking a plea deal, suggested Karen. Something that reflects the true nature of the case and takes Abigail's sacrifice into account. Hayes nodded in agreement. Abigail is not a threat to society. She needs help, not a long prison sentence. Carter took a deep breath. Let's review all the testimonies and prepare a case that seeks not only justice, but also compassion. I want everyone ready to present a narrative that shows Abigail's sacrifice and the circumstances that led her to these actions. Meanwhile, at the detention center, Abigail was being prepared for the trial. Her lawyer, Thomas Green, an experienced public defender, was sitting with her in a small visiting room. Abigail, we need to be ready for everything, said Green, holding a stack of papers. The prosecution may try to exploit your mental state, but we have a lot of evidence in our favor. I just wanted to help Uncle Paul, said Abigail, tears in her eyes. I didn't want things to end like this. I know, Green responded softly. And that's what we need to show the jury. We'll focus on your dedication and sacrifice. We'll bring in witnesses who can speak about your care for Paul and your mental state. We need the jury to see the truth." Abigail nodded, trying to gather strength. "I'll do whatever it takes." Abigail's story had spread throughout the community. Many sympathized with her, and a small crowd gathered in front of the courthouse on the day of the preliminary hearing, holding signs of support. "Abigail is not a criminal," shouted one of the demonstrators. "She's a dedicated caregiver." Inside the courthouse, Carter watched the scene from his office window. "We need to be ready to handle public opinion," he commented to Karen. "This will influence the case in ways we can't predict." The preliminary hearing was marked by emotional testimonies. Mike, the friend who helped Abigail on the fateful day, testified about her relationship with Paul. "She did everything for him," said Mike. "I've never seen someone so dedicated. She was desperate, yes, but never with the intention of hurting anyone." Nurse Susan Miller was also called to the witness stand. "Abigail was always by Paul's side, caring for him with a dedication I rarely see. She was overwhelmed and desperate, but her love for him was undeniable." Abigail's eyes were filled with tears as she listened to the testimonies. Each word reaffirmed her own internal struggle and the unconditional love she felt for Paul. Thomas Green used the testimonies to build a solid defense. Abigail acted under extreme desperation, he argued. She was fighting her own demons while trying to save the only relative she had left. This is not a case of criminal intent, but of sacrifice and love. Carter, on the other hand, prepared to present the case's complexity to the jury. "We need to show that, although Abigail acted wrongly, her actions were the result of exceptional circumstances. Our goal is not to punish her severely, but to find a fair resolution that considers all factors." With the preliminary hearing concluded, the court scheduled the trial date. Preparations were in full swing, and the lines were being drawn for an intense legal battle. The day of the trial finally arrived. The courtroom was packed with reporters, Abigail's friends, and onlookers who had come to witness the unfolding of a case that had captured the attention of many. Abigail sat beside her lawyer, Thomas Green, trying to stay calm as they awaited the start of the session. Prosecutor James Carter opened the trial with a clear and direct statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to determine if Abigail Johnson committed the crimes of attempted fraud and desecration of a corpse. We do not question the fact that she cared for her uncle, Paul Smith, but we must understand the circumstances that led her to take desperate and illegal actions." Carter presented the initial evidence: security videos from the bank, medical records, and the testimony of the paramedic who confirmed Paul's death. He emphasized that, regardless of the motivations, Abigail's actions needed to be judged by the law. The first defense witness was Mike, Paul's friend, who helped Abigail on that fateful day. "I've known Abigail for years," Mike began. "She was always dedicated and cared for Paul as if he were her own father. When she asked for my help to take him to the bank, I knew she was desperate, but I also knew she only wanted the best for him." Prosecutor Carter questioned Mike about his perception of Paul's condition that day. "Did you notice anything strange about Paul on the way to the bank?" Mike hesitated. "He seemed tired more than usual, but I thought it was because of the trip." Nurse Susan Miller was the next to testify. Abigail was a tireless caregiver. She was at the hospital every day, asking about Paul's treatment, making sure he was comfortable. I saw her sacrifice up close. Thomas Green took advantage of the testimony to highlight Abigail's dedication. "Would you say she was emotionally overwhelmed?" "Yes," Susan replied. "But that never stopped her from caring for Paul. She did everything she could, even when she was clearly exhausted." Lisa Hernandez, Abigail's close friend, was called to the witness stand. "Abigail is like a sister to me," said Lisa, her voice trembling. "She was always taking care of Paul, often neglecting her own health. When she told me about the loan, it seemed like she would finally get some relief." "Do you think she was aware of Paul's critical condition on the day of the bank visit?" Green asked. Lisa shook her head. "No, I think she was so focused on getting the loan to help Paul that she didn't realize the seriousness of the situation." Thomas Green focused his defense on Abigail's intent and mental state. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Abigail Johnson is not a criminal. She is a woman who faced unimaginable pressure to care for her uncle. Yes, her actions were extreme, but they were driven by deep love and a desperation that any of us could feel in a similar situation." Green presented the medical records showing the exorbitant costs and Abigail's continuous efforts to keep Paul comfortable. He brought in testimonies from neighbors and friends who witnessed her daily dedication. Carter countered, emphasizing that regardless of motivations, Abigail had still committed crimes. "We understand her sacrifice, but we cannot ignore that she took a corpse to a bank. The law must be applied equally." He pressed the witnesses on Paul's final moments, trying to establish that Abigail knew or should have known about Paul's condition before entering the bank. Finally, Abigail was called to the witness stand. She was visibly nervous, but determined to tell her side of the story. "I loved my Uncle Paul. I did everything I could to take care of him. When he got the loan, I thought it would be our salvation." Thomas Green asked calmly, "Were you aware of Paul's condition when you went to the bank?" Abigail shook her head. "No, I thought he was just tired. He was so determined to go, and I was focused on getting the money to help him. I never imagined that he was dead." Prosecutor Carter asked tough questions, trying to find inconsistencies. "Did you notice anything strange when he didn't respond at the bank?" Abigail cried. "I was desperate. I thought he was just exhausted. I didn't want to believe he could be dead. I just wanted to help." With the testimonies concluded, the judge announced a recess before the closing arguments. The courtroom was silent as everyone reflected on the evidence presented. The complexity of the case was evident, and the jury had a difficult task ahead. Abigail was taken back to her cell, where she sat alone, reflecting on everything that had happened. Her mind was a mix of fear and hope. She knew the truth was now in the hands of the jury. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse windows, casting an almost ethereal glow in the room where Abigail Johnson's fate would be decided. The courtroom was packed with tense faces and eyes fixed on the stage where the closing arguments would be presented. Abigail sat next to her lawyer, Thomas Green, her heart pounding like a drum. Prosecutor James Carter stood up, adjusted his tie, and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice firm and controlled. "We are here to evaluate the facts coldly and apply the law according to the evidence. Mrs. Abigail Johnson brought a corpse to a bank to attempt to obtain a loan, an action that cannot be justified regardless of the motivations." Carter began detailing the events, highlighting Abigail's sequence of decisions that led to the desperate act. He again displayed the bank's security videos, audio recordings, and medical reports. "We understand that Mrs. Johnson was in an emotionally difficult situation, but that does not exempt her from legal responsibilities. The law is clear. Attempted fraud and desecration of a corpse are serious crimes." He paused, looking directly at the jurors. "I ask you to consider the impact of her actions, not only on the rules of society, but also on the institutions we all trust. Our decision must be based on justice and the impartial application of the law." Thomas Green stood up, giving a reassuring pat on Abigail's shoulder before walking to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice laden with emotion. "Today we are not only here to decide on the application of the law, but to deeply understand the human and emotional context of this case." Green started describing the relationship between Abigail and Paul, highlighting her dedication and sacrifices. Abigail Johnson cared for her sick uncle, Paul Smith, with a devotion rarely seen, She did everything she could, often neglecting her own health and well-being. He again presented the testimonies of friends, neighbors, and health professionals who witnessed Abigail's dedication. She is not a criminal. She is a woman who, facing extreme pressures and overwhelming desperation, made decisions that any of us might make in a similar situation. Green paused, looking at Abigail, who was visibly emotional. Abigail believed she was helping her uncle. She did not realize he had passed away. Her only intention was to ensure he received the care he needed. He concluded his argument with an emotional appeal. I ask you to see beyond the formal accusations and consider the sacrifice and love that motivated Abigail's actions. She needs understanding and help, not severe punishment. With the closing arguments concluded, the judge gave his instructions to the jury and sent them to the deliberation room. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, each face reflecting the gravity of the moment. Abigail was escorted back to her cell, where she would await the verdict, her mind a storm of thoughts and emotions. As the jury gathered, discussions began immediately. "We need to consider all the evidence," said the jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a serious expression. "We have to analyze not only Abigail's actions but also her motivations." "She was desperate," said one juror, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. "Can we really blame her for trying to save someone she loved?" "But the laws are clear," argued another juror, an older man with glasses. "She committed crimes. We need to apply the law." The discussions continued for hours, each juror bringing their own perspectives and emotions to the debate. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Abigail's lawyers, friends, and family waited anxiously. In her cell, Abigail felt lost. Thomas Green came to visit her, bringing words of comfort. "You were brave, Abigail. Regardless of what happens, you have shown the world what it means to love unconditionally." "I just wanted him to be okay," Abigail whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want things to end like this." Green held her hand, offering an encouraging smile. "Whatever happens, you are not alone." Back in the deliberation room, discussions were intensifying. "We need to consider intent," said the foreman. "The law allows some leeway based on context and motivations." "If we convict her severely, are we truly serving justice?" asked the young juror. "Or are we just blindly applying the law?" As night progressed, the jury remained divided. They knew their decision would have a profound impact, not only on Abigail, but also on how society viewed cases of desperation and sacrifice. The clock continued to tick, and the jury's decision was drawing nearer. The deliberations were far from over, and the complexity of Abigail's case made every argument more significant. In the courtroom, everyone waited anxiously, knowing that the verdict could change lives and set precedents. The battle for justice and understanding continued, and the full truth about Abigail's sacrifice was about to be revealed in its entirety. The tension in the courtroom was almost palpable. Friends, family, and reporters anxiously awaited the return of the jury. Abigail Johnson was in her cell, her hands trembling and her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Detective Marcus Hayes, prosecutor James Carter, and defense attorney Thomas Green were present, reflecting on the events of the past weeks and the complexities of the case. In the deliberation room, the jury foreman, Robert Jenkins, took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to reach a consensus. We know this is a difficult case and that emotions are involved, but we must focus on the facts and the application of justice." The young juror, Emily, spoke with a firm yet emotional voice. "I believe that Abigail acted out of love and desperation. She made mistakes, yes, but her intentions were not criminal. She deserves compassion." The older juror, John, was still undecided. "The laws are clear. She broke the law, and we must consider that." Robert intervened again. "Can we agree that the circumstances are exceptional?" Can we consider a decision that reflects both the need for justice and understanding? After several hours of heated discussions and deep considerations, the jury finally reached a verdict. The decision was not easy, and each juror felt the weight of responsibility on their shoulders as they prepared to return to the courtroom. The jury's return to the courtroom was met with a tense silence. The judge called the session back to order and asked the foreman to stand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" asked the judge. Robert nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." "Please announce the verdict." Robert took a deep breath and began. "In the case of attempted fraud, we find the defendant, Abigail Johnson, not guilty. In the case of desecration of a corpse, we find the defendant, Abigail Johnson, guilty, but with mitigating circumstances due to her extreme emotional state and desperation." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Abigail felt a wave of relief and fear simultaneously. Thomas Green held her hand, offering an encouraging smile. The judge thanked the jury for their service and addressed the court. "This case is a reminder that justice is not just about applying the law, but understanding the human circumstances behind actions. Sentencing will be announced after a thorough review of the mitigating circumstances." Abigail was taken back to her cell, but this time with a new hope. She knew she still faced consequences, but the jury's understanding of her situation brought immense relief. Thomas Green spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. "We are pleased that the jury recognized the exceptional circumstances of this case. Abigail Johnson is a woman who acted out of love and desperation, and we are confident that the sentence will reflect the necessary compassion." James Carter, the prosecutor, also made a statement. "This case was complex and emotionally charged. We respect the jury's decision and hope that the final sentence will bring justice and understanding." In her cell, Abigail reflected on everything that had happened. The words of support from friends and family echoed in her mind. She knew she still had a difficult path ahead, but the truth of her sacrifice had finally been recognized. "I just wanted to help," she murmured to herself, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted to help Uncle Paul." Days later, the court reconvened to announce the sentence. The judge, after considering all circumstances, delivered his decision. "Abigail Johnson, this court recognizes the mitigating circumstances of your case. Your sentence will be 2 years of probation, with the requirement of psychological counseling and community service." The relief on Abigail's face was evident. She thanked her lawyer, Thomas Green, and embraced the friends and family present. Abigail Johnson's story became a symbol of love, sacrifice, and resilience. Her struggle and dedication inspired many and raised important discussions about elder care and understanding extreme emotional circumstances. Abigail, now free to rebuild her life, found a new purpose. She began working with caregiver support organizations, sharing her story, and helping others navigate similar challenges. Abigail Johnson's case was not just a legal battle. It was a powerful lesson about the power of love and sacrifice, and the importance of looking beyond actions to understand human motivations. Abigail Johnson's dedication and sacrifice for her Uncle Paul are truly inspiring, and make us reflect on how far we would go for those we love. We would love to hear your opinion on this story. What did you think of Abigail's actions in taking Paul's body to the bank? Do you think the jury's decision was fair? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to our channel for more touching stories, and share this video with your friends and family. Your opinion is very important to us and helps keep our channel active and full of interesting content for you. Now, see this story. Carrie never expected that a visit to her mother's clinic would reveal secrets that would change everything. But what did she discover when investigating her own identity? Click on the next video that is appearing for you now, and we'll meet there in a few seconds.